Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's webinar. This is in coordination with the Al Said Foundation. We're going to be learning about youth mental health. While social media has an amazing effect on keeping people connected, it also has negative effects on the mental health of our youth. Social media thrives on reinforcement. It causes the release of dopamine and is highly associated with anxiety and depression. It builds on boosting one's self-esteem and a sense of belonging to a community. But the reward and dopamine kick comes from the potential liking of a picture or comment. Social media is so widely used and has so much great potential, but learning how to use it in a way that's good for one's mental health is extremely important. My name is Joshua Axton, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I'm a junior at Seton Hall University studying diplomacy, economics, and Spanish. At Seton Hall University, I'm president of the Voice of Leadership, a public speaking initiative. Additionally, I'm an active member of campus ministry and the Messina Leadership Institute. I work as a desk assistant on campus. Currently, I intern at the International Rescue Committee, serving as a financial coach for refugees. I conduct research on democratic hollowing during economic crises at Seton Hall University's Diplo Lab. After graduation, I aspire to be a Foreign Service Officer. I am pleased and honored to welcome our esteemed speaker today, Dr. Rosa Lee. Dr. Lee is a teaching assistant professor in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience at UNC Chapel Hill. She teaches undergraduate courses and works to disseminate research as part of the Winston Family Initiative and Technology in Adolescent Brain Development. She oversees Teens in Tech, a website that strives to make psychological research on adolescent brain development and social media and technology use accessible to all. She was a postdoctoral associate and visiting assistant professor at the Duke Institute for Brain Science. She has also taught courses for the Decision Sciences Certificate in the Duke Center for Interdisciplinary Decision Science. She received her PhD in psychology and neuroscience from Duke University, a certificate in cognitive neuroscience, and a certificate in college teaching in 2017. She'll now be sharing with us a short presentation. It seems Dr. Lee is having technological issues. Give us 1 second, please. Dr. Lee, if you want to leave and rejoin the meeting, that might help. Dr. Lee?
Hi, sorry about that. I think my computer booted me out of the meeting.
No worries, presentation is presenting and ready whenever you are.
Okay, let me, just as a backup, is there a way to send you the link?
Yeah, if you put in the chat, everyone will have access.
Great, let me do that first, because it doesn't actually look like it is still sharing on my end. 1 second. Sorry, normally I would take this from my office, but I'm actually on maternity leave this semester, and someone else is using my office. So I'm taking this from. We don't have the same reliable connection. Okay. And then where's the chat? Here we go. All right, I will go ahead and link slides in the chat. And then you all can also have access to that even afterwards. Okay, let me try sharing again. Okay. All right, are y'all able to see the slides change?
Yes.
Perfect, great. All right, well, I apologize, Joshua. I have no idea what you said about me in the introduction, but just in case, I'm a teaching assistant professor at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And actually, one of the courses I teach is about social media technology and adolescent brain development. So definitely spend a lot of time teaching and thinking about these topics of how social media affects our children and adolescents specifically. I also think it's been really interesting getting to teach that class to a bunch of undergraduates and hearing their perspective, having grown up using social media and thinking about the impact it's had on their lives. All right, so I did catch the beginning of Joshua's intro talking about social media potentially being problematic. And that is a question that I get all the time from parents and just regular folks when they learn about what I do and what I teach. Right? Everyone wants to know what's the deal with social health. And it turns out that if you ask teenagers about their social media use, they have a similar relationship. So these are data from the most recent Common Sense Media Survey. I want to draw you to these two numbers right here on that right-hand side. So in 2021, 34% of teens say they enjoy social media a lot, whereas 62% of them are using social media every day. So you can see already this kind of disconnect that almost 2/3 of teens are on social media on a daily basis. On average, they're spending about 90 minutes a day on social media, but only about a third of them say they're truly enjoying it a lot, right? So why are they on these platforms? Why are they spending all their time on these platforms if they're not fully enjoying it? And that, of course, begs the question of, right, is social media actually bad for mental health? We've seen this in the news a lot lately. There was the Facebook whistleblower about Instagram being especially toxic for teen girls. The Surgeon General has put out his own warning about this crisis. And so people ask us all the time, well, is social media bad? Or if they've already made up their mind, say, okay, how bad is it? And I want to push back a little bit. And I want to say this is not the right question that we should be asking. So as a little bit of a digression, let's replace social media with food. Right? You wouldn't say is food bad for your health because it's much more multifaceted than that. Right? So can food be bad for your health? Yes, it depends, right? It depends on how much food is being consumed. It depends on when this consumption is happening. This both includes time of day and developmental time period. Really importantly, it depends on what is actually being consumed, right? We can probably agree that there are some foods that are healthier than others. And it also really depends on who is doing the consuming. As someone who was pregnant not that long ago, there are a lot of foods that I was not permitted to eat while pregnant that someone who is not pregnant to eat, right? So there's a lot of individual variations or interactions with individual health status that matters on the effects on how food can affect health, right? So we can take the same framework and also apply it to social media use, right? So the effect of social media use on mental health really depends on, again, how much social media is being used, when, what types of behaviors are happening on social media, and then characteristics of the people using it. So I want to walk us through a few examples of each of these points, right? So first, right, how much social media is being consumed. That Common Sense survey said an average of 90 minutes media per day for our teenagers in the US. So these are some data from an older survey. These are actually British adolescents. It's about 120,000 people representing these data points. So it's a really big data set. And both of these figures are showing the relationship between mental well-being and screen time. So not a perfect proxy for social media use, but potentially getting at that. And of course, we also know that these days a lot of time spent on devices is spent on social media. And what I hope you'll notice is that we have what in science we'd call an inverted U-shaped relationship, or we can call this a little mini mountain, where there's actually kind of a Goldilocks effect, that there's sort of a just right amount of screen time. 1 to 2 hours of screen time seems to be associated with an improvement in well-being, and then it gets worse after that. Right, so this suggests that, and there's other research suggesting that just telling people to get off their phones, get off social media, isn't kind of a be all end all fix their mental health completely. So this suggests that a little bit of time spent on technology, a little bit of time spent connecting with people might be beneficial, whereas no time at all or too much time can have negative effects. I do also want to warn here this big caveat that we think about all the time in science that correlation does not equal causation. So just because we see a relationship here, we don't know exactly if it is the social media use causing the well being, if it's well being causing social media use, or if it's a little bit of both. And actually, there's lots of other research suggesting that it is a little bit of both. So there's evidence that social media use can worsen mental health, but also evidence that folks with poor mental health can push them to spend more time on social media. All right, so that's how much is being consumed. There's also some interesting interactions about when social media is being consumed. So one that we think about a lot with our adolescents is screen time and social media use right before bed. So this figure here is showing time spent sleeping in a group of adolescents and how much time they're spending on their screens after 9 p.m. And you can see there's a negative relationship here, that the more time these kiddos are spending on their phones late at night, the less sleep they're getting. And this, we can't tell this from the figure, but from this experiment, we actually know that this is causal because in the same study, they asked teens to stop using their phones after 9 o'clock and their sleep went up. And this is for a number of reasons. Some of it is if you're on your phone, that's just time you're not spending sleeping. Some of it is the light of the device actually disrupting circadian rhythms, and we can see this in changes in physiology. So changes in later melatonin release. And also some of this is being on social media is exciting, right? If you're a teenager chatting with your friends when you should be going to bed, you're thinking about drama that's happening in class or happening at school, and you're not just relax and put yourself in a getting ready for sleep. And I'll also note here too that sleep can also, the device use can affect sleep, but sleep quality can also affect device use. So we see this kind of reciprocal relationship where being on your phone can disrupt sleep. But nowadays, how often do you get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night? And if you can't go back to sleep, then you pick up your phone, right? So poor sleep can also lead to more device use. Right? And of course, depends on what teens are doing online. So a few examples here. So first, there's some hashtags Fitspo and Thinspo. If you are not on social media, Fitspo is Fitspiration. Thinspo is Thinspiration. So Fitspo was originally put forth as inspiration for supposed to be theoretically body positive. Instead of focusing on how you look, focus on what your body can do. But in reality, if you actually search that hashtag on Instagram, you get a lot of folks with a specific body shape. And in fact, I wasn't sure who the audience for this would be, so I chose some more covered photos. If you actually search the hashtag, it's mostly people in very skimpy clothes, showing off their muscles and their abs, things like that. Hashtag Dinspo, even potentially more dangerous. This is a hashtag that's often used in what's called pro-ANA groups. So these are folks who have eating disorders like anorexia, and they go online and they use this hashtag to find inspiration to help them feel inspired to greatly restrict their food intake. Again, I chose a cartoon image here. If you do search this, there are some, I think, very disturbing images of people who are extremely unhealthy. So these are some ways and some social media behaviors that can be especially damaging to mental health. This is how Instagram's own research suggested that the highly visual nature of that platform seemed to be especially damaging to body image for young girls. And I'd argue that the relatively recent rise of superhero movies with male stars who are extremely unrealistically muscular is probably also taking its toll on young men, but that's been less studied. In contrast, on social media, you can also find this hashtag BOPO, which stands for body positivity. And that hashtag is more associated with celebrating people of all different body types and shapes and colors and abilities. And there's a good body of research that finds that having teen girls look at photos under this body positivity hashtag, that can actually improve their body image. Whereas, probably not surprisingly, looking at idealized thin models worsens their body image. Right? So just one example of how very different behaviors online can lead to very different results. And then finally, it also really depends on who is doing the consuming. So we care a lot about what's going on with adolescents. This figure, I know it's kind of not the most friendly, but let me walk you through it because I think it's a really important one. So these are data from a survey of, again, over 100,000 British adolescents, and they track them over time. So between the ages of 10 and 20, every year they did surveys about their social media use and their life satisfaction. This is a study that found that both social media use is related to, can cause, sorry, is associated with later worse life satisfaction, and also that worse life satisfaction is associated with more social media use. But specifically, there are specific age windows in which social media use is associated with worse life satisfaction 1 year later. Those are in gray in this image. And what's really and it's split by gender, so females at the top, males at the bottom. For both genders, age 19 is a time where social media use seems to actually cause worse mental health. The authors think this is because it's a time of change when kids or older teens, young adults in this case, are going off to college. There's a lot going on. It's a really disruptive time of life. But if you look further to the left, there's an age difference for little girls and boys, for girls and boys. So girls, that window of vulnerability, the ages when social media use causes them to feel worse 1 year later, is between the ages of 10 and 13. And for boys, that's 14 and 15. Right, so if you were students in my class, I'd ask you to pause and think about what those windows might be. Since we're not so interactive here, I'll just tell you, we think this has to do with puberty, that all of the bodily changes that come with puberty, all of the social changes, all of a sudden your social status matters a lot to you. Your body is awkward, your body is different, your body might not look like how you want it to look. You care a lot more about what your peers think about you. These might be especially vulnerable age windows when we have to be really careful about our kids using social media. That these are times when they might be especially vulnerable to the negative effects that can come from being on social media. And just to end on a positive note, there is quite a bit of evidence suggesting that social media use can be especially beneficial for minoritized or marginalized identities. So this is based on US populations work with LGBTQ plus youth. We know in the US, compared to non-LGBTQ plus youth, they face much higher rates of bullying and mental health issues such as depression and suicide. But research has also shown that these youth are more likely to have friends that they first met online. So they might have trouble finding friends in person, but they're able to use online spaces as a way of connecting with people with similar identities. And they also are more likely to say that their online friends provide more emotional support than their in-person friends. So you can imagine if, so this is a photo I pulled online from the San Diego LGBT Youth Center. If you're in a big city or in a place where people are very accepting of your identity, it might be easy to connect with other people like you and feel accepted. But if you are in a place where you might be the only kid in your school who might have this marginalized identity, then online might really be the only safe place where you feel like you can be yourself or you feel like you can explore what it means to hold that identity. So it does seem like, and again, in these cases, access to more people like you online, if you can't find them in person, can be really beneficial. All right, so that's just a very quick rundown of what I'm hoping will get y'all to think in more nuanced ways about the effects of social media on adolescents and mental health in general. I get this a lot too from parents. What am I supposed to do with this information? So we have a few tips that can work for not just parents, or sorry, not just teens, but also people and parents themselves. So to go back to that food analogy, we like to say you can also think of screen time as a diet, right? So this is kind of the old school, a revamp of the old school food pyramid where you take a little of different things, have more healthy whole grains, fruits and vegetables, have sparingly red meat and butter, etc. And you can think about screen time in a similar way. that maybe educational screen time is really helpful. Listening to music while you study can be a good thing. A little bit of video games is okay, but we really want to limit, specific social media platforms that might be problematic for you, or using screens after dark. We also like to tell, when we teach about this to younger audiences, we like to talk about thinking about social media as a seesaw. So everything you do on social media could have a potential positive or a negative effect. And we actually don't want to be balanced like this example figure here, right? We want more positive effects than negative effects. So if you're having social interactions, make sure that they're interactions that make you feel closer and more connected to the people around you, rather than maybe watching the world go by through your phone, and that might make you feel more isolated. And then this is an exercise I give my students at UNC, is having them spend a day just engaging in more mindful social media use. So before you log on, before you pop open your phone to check your feed, think about why you're doing it, how you're feeling, keep track of what you're doing, and then when you're done, check in again. Well, did that make you feel better, or did that make you feel worse? When I ask students to engage in this exercise, to just do this every day, or sorry, do this one day for every time before you check social media, a lot of them say things like, I don't even know why I opened it. It's just muscle memory now. Or I was bored when I decided to go on Instagram and I realized I could be doing something else with that time. We like to think about, especially when it comes to adolescents, they don't love being told what to do by authority figures. So we lean more on let them figure out for themselves, or encourage them to figure out for themselves what they're doing, and is it helping them or not. Right. And then the last piece is a little bit of a plug for our organization at UNC. We maintain a website called teensintech.org. If you are an educator, or if you have children who are having classes in even health classes, social emotional learning, information technology classes, we've got a curriculum up on our website that's all about digital media literacy, and actually does a deeper dive into some of the stuff that I've talked to you all about today. It's a pretty deep dive actually about their own brains. So we know that adolescence is a time of heightened reward processing and heightened social processing. And of course, what is social media? It's a little reward delivery system through social interaction that you can carry around with you in your pocket. So we teach them a little bit about why social media is so appealing at that age, and then some strategies for, again, checking in on their social media use. Are they actually getting what they want out of it? Or are there other things they could be doing instead? All right, so that is my quick rundown. I don't know if I'm supposed to take questions here, if Josh and I are going to have a discussion, but I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. That was just a wonderful presentation. I'm going to open up the floor to questions. I have a set of questions that I have, but of course, if any of the participants want to go first, go ahead and raise your hand in the chat. I'll give you guys about a minute or so to think of any questions you may have and respond.
All right, I'm going to go ahead. I'll stop sharing my screen for now. Don't think we.
All right. Seeing none, I encourage the audience to feel free to raise your hand at any moment, and you can ask a question next. To get us started with, what inspired you to start studying this topic?
Yeah, so my PhD was actually on risk taking and social influences on reward processing in adolescents. So I actually did not start off doing work in social media at all. I was more interested in how to, let me think how to put this. So there's basically we find that kids or teenagers are more interested in rewards when their friends are around. So there's this theory that something about being in peer scenarios makes rewards much more appealing, specifically in adolescents. Interestingly, we see that not just in humans, in rodents. So there's studies that, like, if you put juvenile teenage rats together, they'll actually drink more than when they're alone, for example. So that was kind of the work that I was doing. And at UN, we're just starting to begin on research on social media and adolescence. And it seemed like a really I think, interesting pivot and a good fit for some of the work that I've been. And the field of research into social media has really exploded in the last few years. When I was in graduate school, only probably a handful of folks were working on this topic, and now we're starting to see, the folks who are doing their PhD research topic, now they're their own professors, starting entire labs dedicated just to the effects of social media use.
Wow, that's incredible. Um, I guess a question that you touched on a little bit, but I wanted to dive more into is what can parents do to help promote healthy social media use for their children, particularly teenagers and around that danger age you talked about for either gender?
Yeah, so we are big proponents of open family communication. Right? Parents know their kids better than we don't think. At least we don't have enough research to make any like one size fits all proclamation. Right? People want to ask me like, okay, how much time should I be letting my kids spend online? And I tell them, well, it really depends, right? What are they doing? Are they doing something really creative with their time, or are they kind of just lying around watching TikTok videos until 3 in the morning? So I think it's really family dependent. We encourage families to talk, and specifically, especially if you're at the age where your kid is like, I really ask them why they want a phone. What do they plan to do with it? We've got some great resources up on our website, some other really good resources. Common Sense Media is a big one. And then also one of our collaborators, Jacqueline Nisi, runs a newsletter called Techno Sapiens, and she's got really great advice in there. So it's all about having an open communication with your kids, and then kind of basically agreeing upon ground rules that both you and your kids can be comfortable with. So for some, that might mean no phones until you reach a certain age. For other families, that might mean you can have a phone, but we need to have your passwords, or every night we look through what you've been doing. And other families might be okay with like, all right, here's your phone. Come talk to me if you have a problem. Right. So again, it really varies from family to family. I think the most creative approach I've heard when giving talks to parents, I had one who said, you can have a phone or you can have dollars, whatever you want, and their kid picked $1,000 instead. So right, it really depends on your family resources and things like that. But again, big proponents of open communication. Know that for a lot of the research suggests that parents think they know a lot more about what's going on with their kids than they actually do. So if you ask parents, how much do you know about what they're doing online? They'll say, oh, I know like 90%. If you have kids, ask kids, how much do your parents know about what you're doing online? They say more numbers. Looks like we have a question in the chat. I'll let Joshua, do you want to read that?
Yeah. So Emmett asked, what do you think of social media restrictions for kids in Utah? It prevents people under 18 from viewing social media from 12 to 6 a.m.
Yeah, so I'll say I think that's a very, I think the intention behind that law is well intentioned. I think one of the biggest, most concrete evidence-based things we can say, stop having your kids use their screens at nighttime, for a number of reasons. Like I mentioned, it's very disruptive to sleep, but I also get pushed back because now I hear from parents all the time, well, my kids' textbooks are on their phones and I can't tell if they're doing their homework or if they're reading their textbooks, right? So I understand the intention behind that, right? Stopping device use late at night, that we have very good evidence that improves sleep, can better grades, safer driving, better health, all these benefits. However, I'm not sure about this law, using this law approach, to implement that. And it's a really tough case, right? I don't know if someone is under 18. You make box, right? A kid can just say, I'm actually 18. Do you force them to show some proof of age? Get into these privacy issues, right? That do we really want to make everybody upload a picture of their driver's license in order to have a social media account? These tech companies already have a lot of information about you. They probably don't need your driver's license number, but then again, do you really want to be forking that over? So yeah, again, China, to summarize, I understand the intention. I don't know if legally, like implementing a law is the best way to go about doing so.
With a follow-up from the audience in terms of big data, having your data, ET asks, what advice would you give to teens in regards to data access and privacy concerns?
Yeah, one of the things we really hammer home, both in my class curriculum that we develop for middle schoolers, is to remember that these social media platforms, they're not designed goal of making you happy and healthy and keeping all of your information safe. Designed with the goal of making money off of you. They make money off of your information, they make money off the time that you spend on these platforms, they make money off ads. So kind of keep that in mind. And we know from research about messaging about um, anti-drug PSAs. If you've seen the truth commercials about cigarette smoking, they talk about, right, big tobacco is the enemy here. And we're kind of trying to take a similar approach that these big tech companies, they aren't doing this for your well-being, they're doing it for their own profit. Research also suggests that this type of messaging is especially to teenagers who might have a little bit more of a rebellious streak to them. So kind of appealing events like go against the man might be especially. And I even have to remind my undergraduate students who, you think by the time they're 18, 19, 20 would know this, that everything online, even if you think it's private, even if it's something like Snapchat where they technically disappear, you never know if someone, well, I guess in Snapchat, you'll know if someone took a screenshot of it, but you can't stop them from taking a screenshot of it. So nothing you put out online is truly private. That someone could keep a record of it. The tech companies probably have a record of it. Nothing you keep is private. And these privacy concerns, it's really interesting, not just for teens, but also adults. I find it kind of fascinating how much privacy that we've been willing to give up for the sake of convenience. The research suggests that if you ask people, well, ask people about why don't you care about your privacy, they'll say, well, it's just an algorithm, or I'm just one data point in a sea of thousands. But remember that some human being built that algorithm, and then there are human beings on the other end using that algorithm to kind of pick you out and target you for advertising for now. Potentially could be using that for other purposes later.
Okay. I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier when we were talking about adolescent use of social media. And you made this distinction between creative use and doom scrolling on TikTok till 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
Social media really covers this wide umbrella term. Can you dive into a little bit of the differences that you've seen in like what would be creative use versus something like scrolling on TikTok or Instagram till really late in the night?
Yeah, so that is really where I think the field is moving towards. So a lot of the early studies, including some of these data points that I showed you in my slides, they kind of took a big blunt edge, right? How many hours a day are you spending online? How many hours a day are you spending on social media? And now the research is really moving towards, okay, what exactly are you doing when you're online? And we actually now, speaking of privacy, have all kinds of really interesting research tools. For example, for Android users, there is a research app that folks can develop that records everything that they do on their phones and they send it off to us researchers. I sometimes think it's amazing that they are able to find folks willing to sign up and hand over all that information. Though the flip side is, again, like the Android app developers or people who own Android data, they also know what you're doing too. And they probably have more I shouldn't say nefarious, more profit-driven means than we do. So we're starting to be able to get at more fine-grained things. There are folks at our center at Carolina who are looking at just how many times a day are people picking up their phones. And actually, if you ever, after this, when we get off this webinar, look at your screen time, think about how many times a day do you think you pick up your phone, and then go into your screen time report and see how many times a day you're actually picking up your phone. You might be surprised at how high that number is. Early research was trying to distinguish between what we call active versus passive use. So active is creating content, engaging online in various ways, whereas passive is more like passive and taking in information. We're starting to try to get a little bit more fine grained than that. So one example, there's a nice study that was done looking at social media use during COVID. And they found that it wasn't just like the frequency of interacting with your friends on social media that predicted happiness. It was specifically how often the teens reported those interactions felt meaningful. So in other words, like leaving a comment like, "Oh, your hair looks great. Love that outfit." That isn't potentially as beneficial as maybe actually exchanging like real direct messages, having more of a real conversation versus kind of more superficial interactions.
Okay. And then is there a difference between, say, friends who you purely know online, uh, versus interacting with people who you know in person or just communicating with online?
Yeah, so let me think about how to answer that. So one concern that I think people might have is that online interactions are what we call displacing in-person interactions. So we're interacting online instead of in person. At least the latest Common Sense report suggests that, I think it was Common Sense, that that is not the case. That kids who say they're online almost constantly, compared to kids who say they're not as frequently online, they have similar levels of in-person outside of school interactions with their friends. But the kids who are online almost constantly have much higher online interactions with their friends. So, in other words, the online interactions seem to be supplementing in person rather than replacing them or displacing them. Now, this is not my area of expertise, but we do know that online interactions can vary, right? So there can be some of the superficial image-driven interactions versus I know there's a whole line of research on Finstas, so the fake Instagram accounts that teens have where they can like feel like they're being real, maybe. Um, but that is not my expertise. This that I know that teens are definitely capable of cultivating different identities online, interacting in different ways because of that. Does that get at what your question was?
It touches on it. Yeah, I think that answers it. Um, so in response to like a lot of things that we've been talking about, and we've talked about what parents can do, but how can schools respond and incorporate healthy technology use in the classroom for students?
Yeah, so that's a really tough question, and honestly, I don't think we really know the answer to it yet, because there's not as much data out there. So there's a lot of data looking at like very short term, actually mostly done in college classrooms. Like if you have people on their phones during lecture, they're not going to learn as much, right? So maybe having a no phones on during class is a probably very sensible policy. What I've heard now from speaking with educators and parents is that there's a lot of pushback on the idea of not having phones in school at all. So here in the US, I think a lot of the parent concern is if there's some sort of emergency, some sort of lockdown, I want to be able to reach my child immediately. Um, and we just don't know. There's not really enough data on if you take away phones during the school day entirely, is that a net benefit or a net loss? Right, so potential benefits, kids might pay attention more. Um, they probably wouldn't have kids vandalizing school bathrooms for TikTok clout. But the potential con is maybe there are some, instead of passing notes, kids like are would be texting each other in the hallways, and that's a very developmentally appropriate thing to do. I've also heard folks say that sometimes when, often kids, again, with marginalized or minoritized identities, if they're being bullied or mistreated in school, having their phones around to be able to record that has been a really powerful, I don't want to say weapon, of a piece of defense that they can have to protect themselves against bullying behavior. So we just don't know. I know in the US, there's an organization called Wait Until Eighth, with the goal of trying to get whole schools or whole communities to sign a pledge saying, wait until eighth grade to give your kids their phones. We just don't have enough cases where that's happened that we can actually do really good research on that. Um, just anecdotally, from again, what I've heard from talking to parents, talking to kids and teachers, it's very, very difficult for you to be the only kid in your grade or the only kid in the school without a smartphone. So I think if schools do want to make some big sweeping changes about policy, they really have to think about making sure that it's implemented in an equitable way. And that especially if they're going to get rid of phones entirely, that's something that everyone is on board with.
And are those initiatives pointing towards smartphones or phones entirely?
They're usually smartphones, right? We always say like, well, back in my day, like we didn't have phones at school, or we only had flip phones, so we could call our parents for a ride home, and that was actually okay. Or even before cell phones were invented, you could call the office if there was an emergency, and that was also okay. But the world is different than it was, when I was growing up, or even before then. And it's yeah, there are kind of also bigger societal level changes in how parents in general, parenting philosophies, or how much parents are want to be in touch with their kids.
Yeah. Um, and then is there any data on social media usage kind of after 20-ish, after development is largely done with? Is it
Ooh,
just as harmful?
that is a great question. So let me think about that, because my class is all about adolescence, so I don't even spend a lot of time thinking about adult data. Um, That's a great question. I don't fully know the answer to that because really the research focus has been on adolescence. I would argue that kind of the same idea as with adolescence, that again, it kind of depends on characteristics of the person. I know there's work in college students suggesting that if you have higher levels of baseline depression, stopping social media use in the short term leads to a reduction in depressive symptoms. So that's with college students. So past that kind of middle high school years. Um, but I'm sure there are also plenty of my adults, myself included, that are still not fully comfortable with they're spending online or how much time they're spending on their phones. Um, and then, but yeah. So I would say I'd put it this way: that adolescents are definitely more vulnerable, but the risks definitely do not stop there or stop then. That they can persist into adulthood. Uh, Yeah, I'm trying to think. We know from like the data on body image that really adolescent girls seem to be especially negatively affected by looking at idealized bodies. It doesn't mean that older women are immune, but they are less affected. They're maybe a little more resilient.
Okay. And I guess going off that, what recommendations would you make um, for a healthier or a healthier social media usage in your life, particularly around college age students?
Yeah, again, I think for college age, so okay, so one thing that I have my students do is I ask them to spend a day off social media. If you want the hard version, spend a day off social media and texting. If you want to talk to a friend, actually call them and speak to them over the phone, which I know college students don't really do. So that's a harder version. So spend a day without that and see how that feels. My students have to write a paper on it. You do not. You can just kind of reflect on your own. But the type of things that the students write, a lot of them say, they didn't realize just how much time they were spending on social media or how much free time they suddenly had because they were not on social media. Some of them report having better conversations with their friends, feeling more connected to them in these cases. And very rarely do students say, I want to like never use social media again. But usually they'll say things like, okay, I think I probably could benefit from cutting back a little bit. It's like the same thing, and we'll go back to that food analogy that like crash dieting doesn't really work, right? You can't really say, all right, from today forward, I'm only going to eat like cabbage and whatever, lemon cayenne pepper juice or whatever it is, right? That small changes made incrementally are more likely to stick. So for me personally, I was on Twitter. I hate this, X, whatever. It was Twitter then, the platform now formerly known as Twitter. I was on that a lot early pandemic, and realizing that like being on that I was really doom scrolling on there, and it was really making me feel worse every time I opened the app. So I just got rid of it. And that is an option. You can just stop using these platforms. Other little changes you can make, you can turn off notifications. That's a really big one. A more potentially drastic one, you can, in accessibility settings, make your phone be black and white. So the notifications, you can still see them, but they don't stand out in bright red anymore. Right, all these little design decisions that these companies make, there's a reason why every time you download an app, they want you to turn on notifications, because it's their way of getting your attention, which for them means more time and more money. So maybe start small. Think about if there's a particular platform that's especially problematic, or if there's a specific behavior that's especially problematic. If your social media algorithm seems really weird, I don't know, look at like puppy pictures for a while and see if you can reset it. There's little things like that. And again, going back to that mindfulness, just try to be more mindful of what you're doing. It is very easy to be online and let the time slip by. But if you think a little bit more about what you're doing, maybe that can help you actually stop and think about what you're doing.
Wow, that's wonderful advice. Thank you. Are there any final questions from the audience before we wrap up? Give them a second or two. All right. Seeing none. Dr. Lee, do you have any final words for the audience?
No, it's just thanks for coming. Again, our website has lots of more resources is teensintech.org. Is my email address on there? My email address is rosa.lee@unc.edu. If folks have questions, feel free to send me an email. I'm on maternity leave, so it might be a while before I'll just put it in the chat real quick. So I'm not constantly on my computer like I normally would be. But feel free to send me an email if you'll have any questions. And thanks for coming.
All right, thank you again for coming and telling us all about mental health, particularly on our youth. This was an incredible session, and thank you.
Great, thank you.
Bye.
Don't want me to stay longer, or should I?
We're good to go. Thank you,
Great.
everyone, for coming.
Thanks.
Bye.
Have a good day.